everyone. Welcome to a special in-person edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, we had SEC Media Days last week. We went into a little bit of it with Lane Kiffin last week. We're going to go into some of what happened with Auburn and Bryan Harsin. Before we get to that, we're going to look at some NFL news that relates to a lot of these SEC programs. And the first one that I thought was a huge news was Julio Jones going to the Bucs. Of course, Julio was, maybe one of the greatest receivers ever at the Atlanta Falcons after a stellar career at Alabama. And he got traded to the Titans, and it never really seemed to click for him. It was something that you would have thought would have been good because with Julio being a little older, he thought it would be a good foil to what they had with A.J. Brown. Never really seemed to take off. But now he's going to the Bucs, and if there's one thing we know about Tom Brady, he gets in these veteran receivers a lot of times ones that are way less stable than Julio Jones, who's about as steady Eddie as you get. And they tend to have real great renaissances at the end of their career, a la Randy Moss, Antonio Brown, the list goes on and on. So I think this is a great marriage right here.
No, absolutely, Dan. Like I told you before the show, he's going to fill that Antonio Brown void that was left, but without the drama that came with that, unfortunately. And this team also quietly added Russell Gage, who's also a good receiver as well. So that wide receiver room right now in Tampa is just loaded. And even, with the departure and retirement of Gronkowski, they look like they could be Super Bowl bound again.
That's right, Joe. I mean, I think you were mentioning earlier that even with losing out on Gronkowski, they have Mason Rudolph, who's a really great tight end, who's a veteran, but still in the prime of his career, who did so many great things with the Vikings. And you put them in, you pair that with Julio, with Godwin, with Evans. I mean, it's quite a wide receiver room they have down in Tampa Bay right now.
Yes, and a good offensive line as well. The defense added, some draft picks. And so just a lot of depth, and you kind of see why Brady wanted to run it back.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't get to do it last year, but he did come within one drive of beating ultimately the Super Bowl champions in the LA Rams. And it seems like he's coming back with maybe even more talent than he had before. And, and fitting with our theme, those are all SEC receivers. Julio Jones, Alabama, Russell Gage, LSU, of course, Mike Evans from A&M, and the list just goes on and on with what they have done in Tampa Bay right now.
Absolutely.
And Joe, sticking with some former SEC athletes in the NFL, specifically Alabama, talking about Julio Jones, really sad story, but, maybe a hopeful one. John Mechie III, of course, Alabama's main standout receiver last year, been there for a couple of years. Unfortunately, he found out he's got a diagnosis of leukemia that's going to keep him sidelined for at least this season. And, he was someone that I was expecting to have a really good rookie year. Of course, he had that unfortunate injury in the SEC championship game that kept him out of the playoff game against Cincinnati, and then ultimately the rematch against Georgia where they lost. But until that time, for the last 2 years, he's been one of the more consistent receivers at Alabama. And one thing I've always liked about him is that he showed the willingness to be tough, to throw blocks. I mean, one of the play that I remember most when I think about John Mechie was in the SEC championship game last year when they played Florida. It might have been the play of the game when Florida threw an interception, but Mechie caught up to the linebacker that made the interception, delivered a vicious hit on him, dislodged the ball, and Alabama got the ball back. I think Alabama ended up scoring a touchdown there, and it's like a 14-point flip essentially. And that was because Mechie was tough and never gave up on a play.
Yeah, it's kind of like that Robert Meacham play back in the day for the Saints against Washington, where he took the ball away from the defender after an interception. Those kind of plays are always underrated, where the offensive player can force a turnover or play good on defense, when the script flips.
That's right, Joe. And I mean, now he's going to need that toughness more than ever. But I was telling you about it before the show that it's not unprecedented with these younger athletes, especially football players who get leukemia at a tender age, that they're able to overcome it and come back and play. I mean, I remember there was a great player for Auburn, an offensive lineman named Sean Coleman. He was from up in Olive Branch, Mississippi, and he got diagnosed with leukemia. I believe it was early on in his freshman year at Auburn. Didn't get to play for 3 years, but he got that medical red shirt and then I think an additional red shirt. And he actually got to be a starter at left tackle for Auburn for 3 years and ultimately got drafted by the Browns in, I think, the late second round. and had a good NFL career, played for 7 or 8 years. And this is someone who had to deal with leukemia. And, I'm sure that John Mechie's getting the best medical treatment. I think he's going to have a better chance than just about anybody to come back and maybe to succeed in the NFL.
Oh, absolutely, Dan. And that's a great precedent, to think about on a positive note. And obviously, I think so many people, including us, are obviously rooting for Mechie, to come back better than ever.
I really want him to. I mean, he's definitely a very impressive young man, a good wide receiver, and we wish him the best in his recovery. And I hope that we get to see him on Sundays not too long from now.
Definitely.
All right, Joe. And this is, sticking with the SEC. Now we're talking about a former Texas A&M player, and that's Kyler Murray. And, Kyler Murray, of course, has been, I think in my mind, much better in the NFL than I ever suspected that he would be. I always kind of thought, and you and I talked about this multiple times, he made the wrong decision to choose the NFL over baseball, where he was going to be the number 1 overall pick in the baseball draft. And baseball, like, get paid more money, it's more guaranteed, it's a longer career, but he opted to be a quarterback in the NFL. And I always thought, with what I saw with him when he played big defenses and what appeared to be an injury-prone nature, he's a smaller quarterback, it wouldn't work out. But he's been one of the better players in the NFL the last couple of years. And he cashed in big time with, I believe, a $250 million contract. Well, some details of that contract got released recently, and there's a very interesting contract provision that I don't know that I've ever seen in a player's contract in the NFL. And that's that Kyler Murray has to watch 4 hours of independent film on his own time every single week. Joe, have you ever heard about this before? And what do you think about this?
Yeah, Dan, I have not. I think it's largely unprecedented, this kind of clause in a contract. And a great point I heard on another show this week is, if you're going to give a player this kind of money and you're going to trust him, 24, 25 years old with a considerable future to be the future of your franchise, wouldn't you not want somebody that you didn't trust to study themselves? Like, do you want somebody where you're like, you have to put a clause in their contract in order to encourage them to study? Wouldn't you want somebody, with the work ethic to do it anyway? So that's one thing that troubles me about this.
Yeah, Joe, it's very strange. I mean, you wouldn't think you'd want to commit that much money for that period of a time for someone you wouldn't trust do something basic like film study. I mean, obviously there's some stuff that they know about that we don't, but Kyler Murray's never seemed to me to be someone who's lazy or someone that, just kind of has everything handed to him. And I mean, to play quarterback in the NFL, you got to be pretty smart, be pretty hardworking. And to me, this just seems kind of extra. And I also think that it serves to maybe be a lack of motivation to Kyler Murray in some ways. I mean, you're showing that you don't believe that he would do this on his own time. And I think that could harbor some, discord in the locker room and with his thoughts about the administration. It just seems wholly and entirely unnecessary to me.
Yeah, Dan, it's going to be an interesting situation to see how it unfolds over the next few years. And, in the interim, to your point, I think that Murray has definitely exceeded our expectations. He's performed well to his credit. Do I think he's worth this kind of contract? Probably not. But, he's benefiting from the fact that, teams are always desperate to find a franchise quarterback in the NFL. The way the market's reset, it's kind of like, if I have a starter, I just got to pay him. It's kind of expected that that's the going rate.
That's right, Joe. I mean, if you have a guy who's solid, you're going to pay him. And, now I'm so fascinated now on that subject of what's going to happen with the Cleveland Browns and with the Carolina Panthers. Of course, Cleveland traded their future to get Deshaun Watson with all the muddiness that's going on around him and the uncertainty of what is going to happen with him. And meanwhile, got rid of Baker Mayfield, who you can argue what he does out on the field, but he's the only one that's won a playoff game for them in 40 years. Mm-hmm. And at times I thought he was excellent. And now he's going to the Panthers, and you have Deshaun Watson, who may not get to play at all. And of course they held on to him as long as they could, but I'm almost more interested in what's going on in that Panthers room. Of course, they don't have Cam Newton anymore, but you have, you're still going to have Sam Darnold coming off the injury, and now you're going to have Baker Mayfield. And in my mind, I don't even know how they have enough money to pay for all these people.
Yeah, that's also a curious situation why they wanted to go out and add Mayfield when they drafted Matt Corral.
And they drafted Matt Corral too, yeah.
It's my understanding the GM, the coaching staff has told Corral that he's the future of the team because I don't think they're committed to Mayfield and Darnold past like a year or two from now. But it's still weird, to have all of them competing against one another. And then also the situation in Cleveland is also odd. So definitely not, neither franchise is in a great situation as far as the quarterback right now.
That's right, Joe. And I mean, with Matt Corral, why would you draft him that high if you had the plan to go out and get someone like Baker Mayfield? I mean, I get having a Sam Darnold in there who has a lot of upside and is really good when he's not injured. But now you're bringing in someone who's been a much more successful quarterback than Sam Darnold's been in the NFL. And I mean, to me, it just seems like, why did you draft Matt Corral at all?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense because you can see having a bridge quarterback like Darnold, if it works out great, but adding Baker Mayfield kind of, congests the room a lot more.
That's right. It's not like Baker Mayfield's 36 years old and has got 3 or 4 years left in his career. I mean, Baker's sitting here at 25.
27. Yeah, mid-20s.
Mid-20s, yeah. And he's got at least 10 years left in his career. And if he works out, then presumably Matt Corral's never going to see the field. So to me, it just seems like there's a lot of poor GM work going on in the Carolina Panthers right now.
Without a doubt.
All right, Joe. Speaking of poor timing, you think about the fact that they go out and they draft Matt Corral. Suddenly, you have the poor timing of the Browns going out and getting Deshaun Watson when he has all of these off the field issues and may not play again. And now, of course, Baker Mayfield is going to the Panthers. Texas A&M comes to mind with Ainias Smith. So, of course, we had SEC Media Days last week. Ainias Smith is one of the more dynamic players in America, really great wide receiver. They also use him at running back. He also is a very solid kick returner. So, naturally, he was a choice of Jimbo to be one of the representatives for A&M at SEC Media Days. Unfortunately, the day before SEC Media Days, he gets arrested for a DUI where he was caught with possession of marijuana and I believe an unregistered firearm. And of course, he wasn't able to attend. And I'm sure that was probably a large percentage of what Jimbo had to talk about at SEC Media Days. And it's just a shocking thing for that to happen for someone who you put so much trust in at that time and who it just, it's a very, very weird thing to see that happen right before the SEC Media Day starts.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Hopefully he'll learn from it and come back from it. But at the same time, it's a bad look for the program because you picked him, to your point, as a representative for your program. And it's not a good example to the rest of the team. And it also brings about a distraction, because suddenly Fisher has to kind of, re-script his answers and what he's going to say. And just the entire narrative, shifts as far as what they talk about.
That's right, Joe. And I mean, when you pick players for SEC Media Days, the idea is, of course, it's going to be some of your better players, but I think they really focus on character more than anyone else. You want someone that represents your university well, represents your program well, that shows what you're building and the kind of people that you want. And something like this happening, I'm sure it's going to cause some people to have some second thoughts about Jimbo Fisher's view of people. And it definitely is an unnecessary distraction of what's an important day for them.
Absolutely.
All right, Joe. Someone that's had to deal with a lot of unnecessary and unfortunate distractions is Bryan Harsin. He led off I thought he did just incredible. I kind of thought that he was the star of SEC Media Days because he addressed the elephant in the room right off the bat. And I thought it was great. His opening line was, I'm sure a lot of you out there were not expecting to see me here at this time this year. You would have ridden me off. And he came out and he, basically said, I'm going to talk about this one time. There was nothing to it. That's why they didn't, even though they tried to fire me and they tried to fire those things, they couldn't find anything. And he said, the people that I have left in this program are the people that care about me, that support me. And he had a very quiet confidence about him that I didn't see last year. You didn't really know what his coaching personality was. He maybe seemed a little aloof, a little aggressive and not really fitting in. But I thought he portrayed a lot of confidence, and he seems like he really likes what he has in his team and with the kind of support that he's getting from the players now.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I thought he was very thoughtful with his responses. He came really prepared. Also, I told you before the show, I feel like a lot of coaches will get up there in a press conference and they'll say, the cliche quotes like, we want to win in the classroom and off the field. But he was much more specific with the plan for his players. He's like, we have groups that meet and have dinner together and the things that they do to bond as a team. And that really, impressed me about his player development. And then also, Dan, you feel like there's the motivation for him to come back and prove the doubters wrong. The doubters are going to be there, justifiably so because of what went on, last offseason, thinking he was out the door in the way the season ended. It kind of reminds me somewhat to what Mike Bianco went through at Ole Miss over the last year, albeit, Bianco came into the season with Omaha or bust, implications or expectations. Harsin maybe doesn't quite have that pressure. He definitely has, the pressure to get back on track and right the ship at Auburn.
Absolutely, Joe. It was so fascinating. It was like a tale of two seasons with him. He started off the season at 6-2 and vastly exceeded everybody's expectations. It took Penn State down to the wire. I was at that game. I thought it was a well-coached game for the most part and a really good performance in a rough environment. They go on the road. They beat up on Arkansas. They beat Ole Miss on the road. And it was just, those are big top 10 wins. And then all of a sudden the bottom fell out when they played A&M in a great defensive performance, but in one where Bo Nix probably had his worst performance as an Auburn quarterback. Mm-hmm. And then once that happened, the wheels just fell off. The next week they blew a 28-3 lead against Mississippi State, and they never recovered from it. And it's just so interesting. You wonder if they could have just somehow won that game against A&M, what could have been, and instead they went the other direction. I know there was a Bo Nix injury involved in it, but, they ended up going 6-7. They really weren't that far from being a team that maybe was a 10-win team or a team was even competing for the SEC West at one point. And, of course, they're going to look at that and say that's a coaching thing. Well, it is, but one of the big things that you have in your first year as the head coach is your locker room. And you see the guys that are tough, people that can deal with adversity. And obviously with the amount of transfers, with the amount of coaches that left, there was a lot of people who weren't buying what he was selling. And that's the reason why you give a coach multiple years. And he just seems like he's so much more confident with people that he has left and with the direction in which the program is going now than what he had last year.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, it's going to be tough. Maybe he proves us wrong. Maybe he proves the doubters wrong. The big thing I told you before the show, is the SEC West is so stacked, as far as kind of the bottom teams. And after, go past Alabama, somebody's got to lose. And it's hard, to figure out who that's going to be. And so, I'm not, shocked they would pick, them necessarily to finish there. But there's that motivation for them, to try to go out there and have one of those 2013 caliber seasons. I still, am probably more skeptical of like LSU with Brian Kelly, not sold on that hire. I don't know how Mississippi State's going to look this year defensively. Auburn, I'll put it this way, they always seem to win games, that you don't see them winning. They historically beat Ole Miss. And so there's no reason to think, the bottom's going to fall out. But at the same time, they still obviously have some work to do.
That's right, Joe. And what's interesting to me is, in a lot of ways, I think objectively they have a stronger team than they did last year. The offensive line is very experienced. I think most of them are 5th and 6th year seniors. They have 2 first-team All-SEC defensive linemen, and Derek Hall from Gulfport has been a really good defensive end. They also have, they have Burks that's on the defensive line that's good. You have Owen Papo, who's, I think, going to be a real great linebacker this year. He's someone that came in with a lot of expectations, but it's been injured a lot, but is a real intelligent leader. I think he's like started a couple of his own companies, and he's someone that a lot of people respond to really well, which is one of the reasons he was there for SEC Media Days. And, of course, you look at the running backs, they have Tank Bigsby, and of course they also have Jarquez Hunter. And so I think from a running back standpoint, they may have the best 1-2 duo in the SEC when it comes to running backs. And, it's really going to come down to quarterback. But I think when you look at a lot of the position groups, they're in a better situation than they were last year. There's still a lot of issues at wide receiver, which of course is their weakest position last year. But there's a lot of transfers that have come in. There's a Devlin from Miami, and then I'm hearing these really good things about a receiver named Coy Moore, who came from LSU to Auburn, who everyone's really raving on. And of course, from a tight end standpoint, it's maybe the strongest group of tight ends that Auburn's ever had, with their renewed emphasis on tight end, with John Sinker, who's a sixth-year senior. And of course, you have Jake Fromm's little brother, Luke Fromm, and there's a lot of tight end talent. And then also Landon King, who's like a hybrid tight end wide receiver. So I think that they're going to keep hitting the tight ends a lot, and we'll see what the wide receivers do. The good news for Auburn fans being on the wide receiver front is I'm really excited about the wide receiver coach hire they have now. They hired Ike Hilliard, who was just a fantastic player at Florida, had a great NFL career. He won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants, and he's been coaching the NFL for the last 7 or 8 years, and this is his first college job. And by all accounts, the receivers are really listening to him because he's the guy that did it,
With the Steelers on the NFL level, is that he's been coaching?
Yeah, he was with Steelers under Mike Tomlin for a long time. And so I was really happy with that hire because it's been a long time since Auburn has hired, and what in my mind is a wide receivers coach who, performed at the highest level with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a good hire. Mike Tomlin and that Steeler, track record speaks for itself. I mean, I agree with you. I think that there's more depth on this roster than most people give them credit for. I think that most people have a tendency to look at a situation, if you don't know who the quarterback's going to be, it's like, there's questions there. Honestly, Dan, if you look at teams in the SEC West, like there's 5 or 6 teams where if you told me they won 9 or 10 games, wouldn't shock me. If you told me they were 4 and 8, wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same with Ole Miss. It's kind of topsy-turvy, but that's what makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you have one certainty in the SEC West, and that's Alabama. I'm not saying it's certain they're going to a national championship or even win the SEC, but it's certain that they're going to be a team that wins 10, 11, 12 games. You know it's going to be the case with the amount of talent that they have on both the offensive and particularly the defensive side of the ball this year. But you look at the rest of them, I mean, even A&M, who is, put together this historic recruiting class, they're all still freshmen right now. And you don't have a real solid quarterback for certain coming in there either. You mentioned LSU's in their first season. And I would say that, if Harsin can win 7 or 8 games, he's for sure okay. And, I mean, I think he has the possibility to win maybe as many as 9. He could win something like 5. You're right. There's like a huge gap right there. But one thing I will say for all the Auburn listeners out here, historically, when people pick Auburn at the bottom, they tend to have good seasons. I don't know what it is about it. I've heard Clay Travis describe Auburn as a tent revival where they start talking a big game, they're terrible, but then suddenly they'll spring up out of nowhere where no one thinks that they're any good and have a great season. And the last time that Auburn was picked last in the SEC West was 2013. And of course, that year Auburn was 13 seconds away from winning a national championship. And of course, had the great kick 6 and Prayer Jordan Hare games.
That's right, Dan. I mean, it's going to be pressure, but at the same time, you can't really bet against anybody right now in the SEC. And I do like the demeanor and poise of Harsin. Like, I feel like a lot of coaches wouldn't have that at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, with all the things that he went through, he could have justifiably been angry, aloof, not wanting to talk to people. But he really, I thought, took command of the situation and used it to his advantage to show his strength. And you see what all these players that stood up there that had his back, that went against the administration, talked about how much they wanted him to be their head coach and the culture that he was building. You can see what they were responding to right there. And I was very impressed by him.
Yeah, he doesn't like go in there like looking guilty. He looks in there like he has a fresh start and he's got confidence.
That's right. I mean, if you ever had a us against the world mentality, he's got it this year, and I'm fascinated to see what he does. But at least in winning the press conference, he definitely did that this year.
That's right.
And speaking of winning the press conference, you can see Joe and I win every single online press conference moving forward. You can also see all of our old episodes on Spotify. And, of course, you can watch the videos on our YouTube channel if you want to subscribe to the Dan and Joe Sports Show YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show and like our Facebook fan page. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.